It's being recorded now. So, and we will make these available after the meeting. So if you want to share it with your colleagues, your coworkers, you're welcome to do so, as well as the previous versions of the roundtable that you can find in that link below the list of names in the chats or in the shared Google document. So, all right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for your attendance today at this LTI Roundtable meeting. The purpose of these meetings is to give you a chance to have access to some of the engineers, the developers, the architects who've helped define and assemble the LTI specification and the LTI Advantage suite of services. Previous meetings of these roundtable, we've focused on example implementations. We've discussed various issues, topics that come up as you look to migrate from earlier versions of LTI to LTI Advantage. So there's a host of topics that we've discussed previously. We imagine that we'll be repeating some of these over time as we get new participants joining the group. We hope that the previous recordings are also continue to prove useful. So if you do have topics, questions that come up in your thoughts or efforts to work with LTI that you feel welcome to bring them up here in this meeting. The last portion of our meeting will open to question and answer. We have received several questions leading up to today's meeting that we'll address. There's a Google form. A link is also in that shared Google document that points you to where you can submit questions at any time, and we'll try to get to those as part of our monthly roundtable meetings. So, and the whole goal is around these meetings is to make LTI Advantage more accessible, easier to use and understand and want to adopt. So any topics that would fit in that line of thinking to help make your lives easier, we welcome that input and hope you'll share that with us so we can address any lingering concerns, questions, issues in future roundtable sessions. So I want to acknowledge our co-chairs that lead the LTI project group. I think they're all here, but our list of attendees is growing large, so I won't take the time to try and filter them, but just want to thank Claude Revert from Cengage. We have Andy Fisher from Penn State University and Martin Leonard from Turnitin, who are the co-chairs of the project group. And we also have Bracken Mossbacher, who is the lead engineer, developer, IMS staff member responsible for LTI. So Bracken you'll probably see him actively participating in the group chat to help guide the discussion as I work to facilitate the meeting and run through our agenda. So I'd ask that everyone keep their microphones quiet. Unless you do have a question, there will be opportunity at the end, and I'll let Sheena and those from D2L who will be doing the demo alert you to whether to save your questions to the end or to just raise your hand throughout their presentation as you have questions, and they can operate that by their preference. And then at the end of our meeting, we'll try and go through questions that have been submitted or that have come up during our discussion today. So before we begin, I just want to remind you, you can see the links just below the list of attendees in our shared Google document. There's a link to an IPR statement. Our IMS's intellectual property rights policy is published there, and it requires us to read this statement at the start of these meetings. Please inform me if you're personally aware of any claims under any patent applications or issued patents that be likely to be infringed by an implementation of the specification or other work product that's the subject of this meeting. You need not be the inventor of such patent or patent application in order to inform us that a claim might exist, nor will you be held responsible for expressing a belief that turns out to be inaccurate. And if you would rather discuss patent issues or information that you'd rather share outside of this meeting, you are invited to contact me or any other IMS staff member at any time. IMS also has a participation agreement. The link is also there just beneath the IPR link. That participation agreement essentially asks that the details of discussions in meetings like these, resources, documents that we create or provide not be shared outside of the membership of this group. And with that, we'll head right into our demonstration from D2L Brightspace and pass the controls to share the screen over to them.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear, thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Shinal and I'm a product manager here at D2L. And then basically what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be showing you how LTI Advantage is set up and also provide a working demo of Cengage in Brightspace as well. So if anyone's familiar with how the legacy LTI workflow worked in Brightspace, we've slightly changed the process by intentionally separating the registration from the deployment. And then unlike the legacy LTI 1.1, if a link needs to be created, it has to be bound to a registered tool, which is different from what we had in the past. So you can create an LTI tool in Brightspace at the org level only, and that starts with an LTI Advantage administrator registering a tool locally. So registering a tool requires the administrator to define core details around the tool, which we'll be demonstrating shortly. So what I'm going to do here is from the cog, I'm going to go to Manage Extensibility. And then we've added a new LTI Advantage tab. And then from here, I'm actually going to just click Register Tool. So this is where we recommend putting in, the name is required. So I'm just going to call this a test for now. And then we'll need to be putting in a domain. The domain is used in Brightspace to assist with domain matching, and it allows Brightspace to suggest tools to bind ad hoc links to registered tools during the creation. The next thing that we're going to require is the redirect URL, and the redirect URL are endpoints where the authorization response can be sent to. It's possible for tools to provide many different redirect URLs, so we have allowed entering more than one. The next item that we require is the OpenID Connect login URL, and it's the location where the tool is going to be launched to during the initial OIDC launch. And lastly, we allow for a key set URL as well. This is where the tool stores the keys, and it's used as a reference point for D2L, or for when D2L performs a key lookup during the OIDC launch, and it's only needed if we're going to be using any of the extensions. So once we have the criteria that came from the tool within the Brightspace registration, now you can assign which extensions that tool is going to have the ability to use. We also added in the ability to send the user context role and or the institution role. So the institution role refers to the user's role at the organization level, and then the context role refers to the user's role in the org unit where the activity is being performed. So in general, this is usually the course offering. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit register. And we also don't allow you to use the same domain multiple times or the name. You got to love demos, right? Okay, sorry about that. So once the tool is registered, you're actually going to receive Brightspace registration details to provide back to the tool. The Brightspace registration details are also stored in the UI in case you need to revisit them in the future. The registration details include the client ID, which is the ID used in the OAuth 2 authentication to make the requests to the services. We also include the Brightspace key set URL, the Brightspace OAuth 2 access token. This is for tools to go retrieve new access tokens for OAuth 2 requests. The OpenID Connect authentication endpoint, the Brightspace OAuth 2 audience, and then the issuer. So I'm going to hit done. And then if I go back into that tool, then I can see the Brightspace registration details below. And then we also added in these copy to clipboard buttons so you don't get any weird white spaces when you're trying to provide it to your tool. So after this, I can either hit view deployments to go to create the deployment, or I can go to the COG and then external learning tools and then LTI Advantage. So we're going to be creating the deployment now, and deployments allow the sharing of registered tools in Brightspace to specific org units or descendants of parent org units in Brightspace. By clicking on the new deployment button here, this will bring you to the deploy tool screen. And when deploying a tool, you must have to select a registered tool first. And based on the tool selected, the extensions will either be selectable or not. So if at the registration level, I said that my test 1, 2, 3 didn't have extensions, this would actually be grayed out. So I wouldn't be able to click any of these. So I'm gonna type in a name, hopefully I haven't used it yet. And then I'm gonna enable all of my different extensions. And as I scroll down, I have all the security settings. So I can send anonymous launches. I can choose to send the org unit information, the user information. I can unclick certain items or click them back on. The link information as well. And I can also choose whether or not I want to send the class list if the user's not known to the tool. After this, I'm going to choose my add org units. So this basically says which org units are allowed to use this LTI tool. And I can either do it for specific org units, or I can choose a department one and I can say all descendants of that department. Now, when I create the deployment, we'll receive, once it's successful, you'll receive the deployment ID, and this is a GUID-based unique ID that's specific for the deployment. It's sometimes required for certain tools at the time of registration. Other tools will allow it to be set up on the first launch. And then similar to the other screen, the registration screen, if I come back into this tool, I can always see my deployment ID, and I have the copy to clipboard option as well. Now I'm not monitoring chat. I'm just wondering if I should be monitoring the chat here.
We'll watch
You're
it for you
good.
and answer any questions.
Okay.
We'll go to a QA period after that.
Okay, thanks everybody. Okay, so now that we've successfully registered a tool and we've deployed it, the next step is to create the links. So links can either be created at the org level and then shared down to the different org units, or also they can be created at the org unit level. So for this one, I'm just going to create them at the org level and then share them into the specific org units instead. I can either do this, I can do this by clicking view links, and then I'll see a new link. And then here's where I can enter in the name of the link, the URL of the link, a description if I want, and then I can choose what type it is. So if I choose basic launch, then this is just doing a basic launch into the tool. If I choose basic launch widget, it supports a basic launch from the Brightspace widget to a tool. Basic or deep linking quick links supports deep linking from Brightspace to a tool via quick links. So this would be going into content and then existing activities. And it provides an interface within the tool that allows the user to discover and select one or more items and then place them back into Brightspace content. And then lastly, I have our deep linking insert stuff. So this supports deep linking from Brightspace to a tool via our insert stuff, which is our HTML editor. So this will also provide them an interface to select the different items, but they can only return one item at a time. The other thing too is that some of our different items allow for different heights and widths. So we allow you to define it, and then we have defaulted suggestions on the heights and widths. Other items that can be selected during this time would be your substitution parameters and your custom parameters. So we've added in a drop down of the substitution parameters and custom parameters that we support. This is different from the way that we had it with LTI 1.1. And now that I have this all done, I can hit save and close, and then I have my link created. So what I want to do now is I want to be able to show you how it works live action with Cengage. So I have a demo Cengage course right here. And actually, I'm going to back up a little bit here. I'm going to actually first go into my Cengage deployment and then go down to my links. So I've created the Cengage deep link, and we've also added in the start date and the end date custom parameters. And we've set it up as a deep link and quick link. So this means that I'll be able to return many content items into Brightspace. Now with the start date and the end date, that also means that we'll be sending that over to Cengage, and it should be able to pick up the dates from our course offering. So going into the course now, if I go under course admin and then course offering information, you can see that I have my course started on January 1st, 2020, and it ends on April 1st, 2020. So as an instructor, I'm going to go to my content, and then I'm going to add an existing activity, and I'm going to add Cengage deep link. I'm going to select the name of it, and
crossing fingers.
You tried it earlier, Claude, and it worked.
So just to give a bit of context here on the Cengage side, because we are a courseware platform, we also need to create a course instance that's going to be linked to the D2L Brightspace course instance. And so since it's the first launch from this course, then we enter into kind of the course setup. So yeah, carry on, Sheena.
Thank you. So I'm going to copy from an existing course because we did actually have courses set up. And I'm going to choose this 20th century theater course. And as we can see, my dates actually came through from the course offering itself. And I'm going to select my time zone. And then I'm going to hit continue.
Yes.
And then we can see that it's just updating the course information right now. And for this demo, I'm going to want to synchronize individual activity scores and hit continue.
So now that's a deep linking flow that completes right away by adding a deep link to the root of the courseware platform. So now you have a route to access the root content.
Right.
And
now what we're going to do is now we're going to add in the actual activity items.
Yeah, because now the course has been set up, so you can actually add deep links to the actual content of the course.
So for this one, what we're going to do is we're going to pull in this North America and the Atlantic world. And Claude set me up with a couple extra items here. We're going to bring in the Z-test activity, and then we're also just going to bring in the gradebook item only for Z-test activity decoupled.
So yeah, I want to emphasize here because that's a new functionality of LTI Advantage. It allows us to return, to create a gradebook column, but not have to explicitly create a link for the activity for which we're going to return grades. So this one here, the second one, is really, we're just going to create a gradebook column, but there will be no deep link to that activity, just returning grades.
So I'm going to hit confirm, and I'm going to save this. Okay, there we go. So we can see that the two items came forward. If I go over to grades, We have the 2 items. For some reason, we are bringing a second item over, so.
We noticed that. That's something we're gonna have. We'll look. We'll fix that. We have a duplicate there, but yeah.
Yeah, but that's okay. So what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna become a student in this course. And I'm gonna go back to my content, and I'm gonna launch an activity. So this will launch me into a new window, into MindTap.
Yes, hopefully.
We're going from our demo site to the Cengage MindTap QA site here. There we go. Okay, so I've launched over as a student now. And I'm going to exit out of this and skip this. And then what I can do for this demo is I can go to the basic outcome and I can type in a number here.
I'm just going to say that because you're deep linked, what you see here is actually a test tool we have within our courseware platform. And so when Sheena clicked on the deep link, it was a deep link which opened the courseware platform and opened that activity within the courseware platform. So that's how you jump directly into that screen.
Thank you. And then I'm going to hit replace results. And then I'm going to say, okay.
Then you can close at the, right there.
And then go down to the very bottom. And I can see this one's 25 out of 25. And if I go into the next item, I'll go back to that testing tool. And I'll give 0.5. Okay. And then if I close out of it again, then I can see 25 out of 25 and 10 out of 20. So if I go back into Brightspace and I stop impersonating my student and go back to grades, we'll see if, so the 100 came through. So that was the 25 out of 25. And then the half mark should be coming through shortly.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. If one comes, the other one should. It's
exactly.
Just we have a queuing system, so it might it's a bit of synchronous, but it was quick for this one.
Yeah, it was quick for this one.
Yeah. So it might just be in the next cycle.
Yeah. So that's really the major things we wanted to show you. There's a bit of a different workflow within Brightspace now, but we think that it will better kind of explain the differences between a registration and a deployment. But otherwise, the workflow itself from an administrator a faculty member perspective, and especially from a student perspective, nothing's really changed. It kind of keeps doing the same thing. They just get the added benefits of decoupled grades and everything along the lines of that. So, open for questions.
I have a question. You mentioned that all your links are tied to a specific registration now. Does your common cartridge import process just tie it to the first one it finds, or do you know that offhand?
I wouldn't know that offhand. I'd have to speak with the product manager for common cartridge.
Great. Thanks.
Is your 1.3 implementation exclusively for installing new tools, or is there any kind of migration of existing links and things to 1.3?
So migration isn't planned right now. We're currently reviewing different ways of doing it. So we would say it would be exclusively for new tools being set up in a Brightspace instance.
And I think what you mentioned is that you can have your tool 1.1 coexist with a 1.3 instance of your tool under the same domain. That it's a possibility to have 1.1.
That's correct. The domain can reside between 1.1 and 1.3 as a duplicate. We just don't have the ability to do a full migration yet.
Okay.
Does D2L Brightspace provide a test demo platform for tool vendors? Jim, we do. So we have something through through our partners team where you would have access to either shared instances or an instance on its own. And then from there, you'd be able to set up your own tool and also do testing on it. So to get to that, you would just email our partners. I think it's partners@d2l.com to have access to that if you already don't. Any estimate of what proportion of your user base currently deploys LTI links? I know that we have millions and millions of LTI links, and I'm sure that more than 75% of our clients use LTI. How do you share the school org information for the user? I don't think that we would share the school org information for a user right now. I'm interested to know why that would be needed. Is there a list of partners who are 1.3 compliant with D2L? We need to tie a class to a school. Okay. Will, I'm just writing down your name, and I think maybe we can try to connect outside of this. Okay, cool, thank you. Is there a list of partners who are 1.3 compliant with D2L? So there's a list of compliant 1.3 tools, and then D2L is also 1.3 compliant. It's just that we only support the JWKS URL set. So we would also require that the tool would use that as well. Does the LTI 1.3 implementation within D2L support the LTI deep link placement advice options under 1.1? They were getting ignored. I'm going to ask Maggie. Maggie, do you know that off the top of your head? No? Okay. We can take that one away. Sorry, I'm just writing down some notes here.
I can answer to Mathieu about deep linking and the complexity of passing grades.
Sure.
I would say it's probably easier to pass grades in a way than to do deep linking, because to do deep linking you still need to sign your judge back, and that's the same thing you need to do to get an access token. It's the same mechanics to sign a judge to get an access token back. And after, once you get the access token back from the platform, passing grades, the API is fairly straightforward, so there's not much to it. So I think the main mechanics is being able to sign on your side a token, a JOT, and have the platform accept it and act on it. If you do deep linking successfully, that means you've already handling that part. So you can use the same mechanics to require a token.
And then I think that actually might have answered Marty's question too.
No, yes, that's exactly that. That's
Yeah.
the thing with assignment and grade service and LTI Advantage. You have two ways to create a gradebook column. Either when you return your deep link content, you include inside the description of your content of that link a line item section into it, saying to the platform, this content, I would like you also to create a gradebook column for it because I intend to return grade. So that's one way. So that's through deep linking. But you don't have. But you can also use the assignment and grade service API to just post and create new gradebook column. And so there is a trade-off between the two. Sometimes it's nice if you intend to return a link that will be graded, it's better to do it through deep linking. This way the LMS is aware of the relationship between the link and the gradebook column, and this could have some importance between the gradebook and its relationship to a link. But if you want to create standalone and not create a link, then you just use the API and you post a new line item definition, and that will give you a line item handle where you can post grades.
Okay, and then there was a question about registering apps across all tenants and instances. So right now we don't support global registration. We're currently looking at that, or looking at dynamic OIDC discovery as a stopgap between the two of them. I think we've covered all the questions so far within the chat. Are JWKS compatible tools identified anywhere on the IMS site? No, not right now. There isn't anything that says what type of support that there is for the tool. It's a good question though.
But this said, I mean, most platforms are really moving towards JWKS. So there is a bit of a, or this time there is a bit of a in between just providing a public key and asking for a tool to give a public key set URL. But really, all platforms are moving towards public key set. So it's going to be a bit of a transition, but I think that's going to be the default.
I think it's part of the best practices too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Eric, that's a good point. We can bring that up within our internal working groups to see if there's a way to have that displayed on the IMS sites.
Mm-hmm.
All right, any other questions for Sheena or D2L, what you saw today? Or Cengage? All right, well, thank you very much, Sheena and Claude. That was great. So we have several questions that were submitted prior to today's meeting, or I guess just in the last few minutes. I think we've received a couple new ones as well. So this will be our question and answer period. Feel free to...
Before we do that, can I just briefly mention the Chrome 80 cookie thing? So we don't, if we spend time discussing those, we don't miss it.
Sure, go ahead.
Hi everyone, I'm Bracken Mossback, Eric for IMS. In an upcoming version of Chrome, they're going to change the default settings for how they handle cookies. And this will affect LTI tool providers because it affects how cookies are handled in iframes. And so be looking forward to an announcement from some emails from IMS with a nice back page on this, and each of your LMSs have kind of been building up a knowledge base about this as well. So something we think will potentially affect a lot of tool vendors, and so we're trying to get out ahead of it a little bit. And so look for emails about that. We don't have the link right now because we're just working on posting that, but just be aware that there's big changes in February for Chrome that could affect you, and we'll be sending out information later this week.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Bracken. Anyone have any questions about that? And feel free to unmute your mic if you'd rather speak than use the chat. You're welcome to use either one, but don't feel limited to the chat frame only. Okay, well, I'm going to show my screen, which is just the the location where our Google form is located, where we receive the questions that folks have submitted. So we can go through these. I think we can pretty much do it in the order that we received them. So, and I'll rely on our IMS project group team members, chairs to address these, or other resources if someone else on the call in the meeting is familiar with an answer or some help. Feel free to jump in, and this is meant to be interactive and community beneficial. So screen. Okay. So I think this was our first question received in advance of this meeting. So I'm not sure if we have a direct response for this question.
I don't have a direct response for that question, but I have an indirect
All right,
pointer.
that's good too.
No, but just we have another call this Thursday at 1. I think you bring it. Maybe you bring it up the exact details, Mark, later. But
yeah.
Actually, it's a question that often comes up: LTI and mobile, and I think we're still not exactly sure what's the expectation and what kind of. Is there a need for a new specification that address mobile, or just best practices, or maybe a blend of both? And so we're still a bit trying to understand the perimeter of what that could be. And so that's why we have an exploratory meeting this Thursday, trying to understand use cases and what is it that we could do from a specification standpoint, possibly to help interoperability around LTI and mobile, but really trying to understand what are the needs and where could the standard be helpful, or best practices be helpful. So if you have some mobile apps or mobile questions like that, then please join the conversation on Thursday.
Yeah, if you're interested in that, I pasted the link. And this LTI and mobile, it's just an opening discussion on trying to understand what the scope is. The link to it you can find in the shared Google document in the notes section. This is the details for how to join this meeting on Thursday. If you were partners or folks that you work with would be interested in just hearing a little bit more about how mobile and LTI might work together. This is just the start of formulating some ideas and scope around the topic. So thanks for making that tie in, Claude. We'll put that back up towards the end of our meeting as well. But so this question about this next one here about the different versions of LTI. If you're on this page that's linked here in the question itself, there is a bit of an FAQ or some background, some history of why LTI 1.2, 1.3, 2.0, the kind of the order of how these versioning came to be. I think is it this one? Yeah, so this might answer that question a little bit for you. There's some FAQs here, so if you want to dive into that a little bit deeper, I would recommend you just look at some of these resources from that main page that you linked. I'm not sure who submitted that question, but if you're curious about LTI versions, previous versions, how we ended up going from a LTI 1.2 to starting work on 2.0 back to 1.3, this roadmap FAQ page will help answer a lot of that. So if anyone has any other questions related to it, happy to dive into more specifics, but just for general information, that's probably the best place to look. Okay, so back to our recently submitted questions. Another one was, is it safe to set nonce in cookies?
Do you want me to answer this one?
Sure.
So it's safe, it's not very useful, is the answer to that. So generally what a nonce is used for, you want to make sure that a nonce is unique across all requests. So the general best practice for a nonce is that you cache it for the amount of time that a request is valid for. So let's say you're doing an LTI launch and it has a nonce in it. It will also have an expires at time. So you would cache the nonce until that expired at time is reached, and that way, if you get that same request again, you will check the nonce first, and you'll see that either the nonce already exists in your cache, or if the nonce has fallen off your cache, it will mean that the request is played again, but it will be too old to actually work. So the best practice for that would be to cache the nonce for the amount of time that the request is valid for.
And I would just add to that, there is in the OIDC flow the fact that they want that it's a bit like the state behaviors. It expects a nonce to be tied to the browser. So if that's a specific nonce we're talking about, this one that you've put into the OpenID authentication request to get back, then yes, you can somehow rely on your cookie to know that it's coming from the browser, like the state.
Yeah, but you should still cache it, because that will stop somebody from being able to repeat the request. Yeah. Even if it shouldn't matter whether it's in the cookies or not, you shouldn't be able to repeat a request with the nonce in it.
All right, any further clarification on that? All right,
yeah, I have a follow-up question. So you guys can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so from what I've seen, a lot of times because of the specific reason, in order to keep the server as stateless, nonces have an expiry attached to them. I wanted to know what is the recommended expiry time? Like, till what time should the nonce have an expiry? Or like, say like 2 minutes, 5 minutes, what is the recommended time after which nonce should be considered as an expired?
I think the usual is 5 minutes, but I would say between 1 minute and 5 minutes is fine. Yeah, anything less than that, you might end up with a little bit of clock skew issues. But
okay.
5 minutes is usually I would say the go-to for that.
Right, yeah, because like in order to keep the server stateless, it might be difficult for us to have a server-side cache where we can put these things. And yes, I was talking about like the OIDC auth request that gets sent by the browser. So that's why. Okay, thanks a lot for the clarification.
All right, next question was, what would the suggestions be for a tool provider having to support both LTI 1.1 and 1.3 requests?
I mean, yes, I can tell you what we do, but I don't know if it's a best practice. But I know that we basically look at what we receive on the because we didn't want to change our endpoint, and that's a great benefit of LTI Advantage, is that you can keep your endpoints as they are. And in that case, if you keep your endpoints as they are, that means you are allowed to migrate your tool to use either 1.1 or 1.3, or do a migration that doesn't involve redoing your links. Then your link, your endpoint, must be able to, if it needs to support both, then it looks at the incoming payload to determine if it's an LTI 1.1 or LTI 1.3 flow. And oh no, sorry, I may need to backtrack on that. LTI 1.1, you deep link to your launch, so you go there. That's what happened when you click on that. Whereas on LTI 1.3, you don't go to your link. You go to the authentication request or OIDC initiation login URI. So basically, you can create a new endpoint for your 1.3 request. And now, when your tool is used in the 1.3 configuration, then you'll get the OIDC request to that new endpoint, and that new endpoint will contain the target link URI, which was your original 1.1 link, but you will not launch to to that link. You will just launch to your authentication endpoint. Now, if you want to work at the same time 1.1 or 1.3 within an LMS, I don't think that you can have it work on an LMS at the same time for, I mean, I don't know about that. But if you have one tool that you want, in some cases, your deployment is on 1.1 and in other case in 1.3, then I think you can rely on the fact that 1.3 are going to go to the OIDC login request when the user clicks on the link. I know, Martin, if you had anything to add to that, or
yeah. So so the way that we handle it, and I think there are a couple of other people that do it in a similar way, is that we actually convert LTI 1.3 launches back into LTI 1.1 launches. So we have kind of a different front to the LTI 1.3 launch that will deal with the initial OpenID Connect flow, and then again the LTI 1.3 launch with a JWT. But because the data between LTI 1.3 and 1.1 is actually the same data, it's just formatted slightly differently. We convert that back into an LTI 1.1 launch, and then run that through our system as if it was LTI 1.1. We have some, some extra flags so that we know that it was 1.3 if we have to do anything specifically different for that. But that kind of gets you 95% of the way there fairly simply because the data itself is actually the same. You have to do a little bit more, obviously, for communicating with services because service calls are authenticated differently as well. But yeah, the actual launch data you can just convert between one and the other.
Yeah, and actually we do the same kind of approach. I mean, we are 1.3 endpoints, kind of translate that into 1.1 payload kind of thing for the rest of the processing. So we don't have to change internally our tool too deeply. It's mostly on the edge. Mostly on the edge. Edge incoming and edge outgoing. But internally, more or less the same.
And the reason we don't have a lot of specific suggestions around this is that it's depends so heavily on the implementation details of that specific tool and how it works and what methods work best there. But most tools will have to support both for some time, and so figuring out the right strategy for yourself and what allows your developers to maintain both endpoint types is really important. So everyone in the group's happy to chat about it, but it really will be very unique for each tool to a large degree.
Yeah. And I think the thing here is that with LTI 1.3, since you never actually launch to the link there is in the LMS, it's up to you to see what you do with that link, and you might decide to actually go somewhere else based on the link that was clicked on the LMS. So because that link again is never directly launched from the LMS. It's your decision as a tool to go if you actually launch that endpoint or if you actually launch a different endpoint based on the based on the link that was clicked on the LMS side.
And to provide, this is Andy from Penn State, to provide a little institutional feedback on this. We don't want to have our users remake their content because we're just making a upgrade of an LTI integration. We want to make it transparent to our users. So using something like the domain matching is really important for your deep embedded content. We don't want to have to go back in and redo that because just when you have that many courses and that many faculty, it's too much of a time sink. So if it does come down to choices between vendors, that is a determining factor. So we haven't gone to that yet, but we have not upgraded to some tools to 1.3 because they couldn't do the domain matching and making the content work a lot easier.
All right, thanks for that. We just have about a little less than 10 minutes to the top of our hour, so not sure if we'll get to all of these questions today. If we don't, we will certainly try to address them next meeting, but here's one about the security framework and the list of scopes for those.
Scopes are identified on each of the extension specs that define them. They're not all defined in one place because we keep on adding new extensions. For instance, the course group service has just been added. That adds a new scope. So you don't actually need to support every scope unless you're supporting every service. So as you kind of go through and implement services, then you would add a new scope that you support for that service.
Right. And the security framework documentation is meant to span all IMS specs, even even though not all are using it at this point. And so it's a very broad spec that will be utilized by the individual specs like the LTI services. So it'll be very common that people using the IMS security framework are using just a small subset of the available services. That should be a very common pattern. So.
Yeah, and I would just add also on the Perl comment, I think that's something we can bring back internally at Bracken, but I must say also that I find it odd that we have URLs that don't resolve, even though they look like resolvable. So I think it would be nice if it would be self-documented, since we do create endpoints for those, so that those endpoints actually resolve. Because right now it's used more like a namespace, and it's not intended to be resolved. But I think it looks like it should be resolvable to some kind of resource or definition behind it. That would be nice.
I've made note of that. Thanks. All right, next question about resource link ID in the line item claim, intended purpose.
So when you create a line item, your line item, you can associate it to an actual LTI link that exists in the platform. An LTI link in a platform are identified by their resource link ID. So when you click on a link in the LTI, the LMS is going to include the resource link ID in the payload. And when you create a line item, you can associate it to that resource link. So I don't know exactly the mileage around that, but that's the intent here. To do when you create a line item, this line item relates to that link that exists that I know exists in the course platform. I would say I find it way more useful to use the resource ID, because now the resource ID is an identifier from the tool side about which resource this line item is for. It's not whereas the resource link ID is really as the identifier from the platform side for the link. So I found it a bit less helpful. So that's it.
But just to clarify, it is more unique, right? So every time is it a resource link ID is specific just to that user, to that instance, to that one link, or
to that one link, yes. And so and the trick here is that per specification, when a course is copied, the resource link ID should per specification change because it's a new link. Whereas when you copy a course, the resource ID, because they're attached as a metadata on the line items, they should be copied as is. So when you copy a course, the fact that you preserve the resource ID allows you on the other side of the tool side to be able to reconnect your line item to an existing resource. Whereas a resource link ID would be a new unknown resource link, and for this to be aware of it, and the user would have to actually click on that link for you to discover it. But if the platform is doing its work, then the copied line item should have an attribute of the new resource link ID, because now it should point to the link inside that course. So there should be a translation there. So yeah, but again, I would say if I'm creating a new line item in the LMS and I want to tag it with an identifier I can recognize, I would use a resource ID, because I know what it is and I know it will be preserved on copy exactly as is.
Yeah, we would say that the current best practice is to try to not rely on resource link IDs in general.
Yes.
And your situation requires it, but so to try to avoid as a tool provider.
Okay, thanks. And so just to clarify, you mentioned when a course is copied, the resource ID remains, but the resource link ID changes?
Yes, because the resource link ID is a platform originating identifiers for a link. So when you copy a link, you create a new link, therefore it has a new ID. Whereas the resource ID is a tool originating identifiers that the platform has no control over. So when you it's kind of metadata attached to a piece of content or to the line item. So when it copies a line item, it just copies those data as they are, right? It has no way to know what other ID it could be. So the resource ID will be preserved on copy because it's a tool identifier.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, if I could just add, the resource link ID was defined 10 years ago when LTI first came out, before there was deep linking. it's the primary key to the content item in the platform's database, right? So depending on a platform's primary key in their database seems like trouble waiting to happen. But also, when we make a copy of the course, we have to have a new resource link ID because it's a new item in the database. So that's
on the platform side, right? You're
yeah,
saying?
on the platform side,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is why we want tools to identify their resources, whether it's a chapter in a book or an assignment, with their own resource ID. And now with deep linking and with these services, they're able to do that. They weren't able to do that 10 years ago when all there was LTI basic launch.
Yeah, and
yeah.
I was going to say it's worth noting that one of the use cases like in Cengage's use case, they have existing content that you are kind of linking this resource link ID to. So you have pre-existing courses and books and things like that. You might also have the use case where resources are created on the fly as they're created inside the platform. So for instance, in Turnitin's case, when you launch in, we see a new resource link ID, we just create a new assignment because we don't have an existing piece of content that we're going to put there. You're creating a new assignment that we've not seen before. Same with copying it, then we get a new resource link ID. We will, again, create a new assignment. If it has been copied, there are ways of us seeing that it's been a copied assignment, and we can kind of pre-populate it with the settings of the previous assignment, but it's a new piece of content because it's a new link. We don't want all of the students that were looking at the previous assignment on this new one. We're just using it to copy settings over rather than actually copying the resource itself.
Got it. That makes sense.
All right. I think, unfortunately, we are approaching the very end of our hour, so I'll just remind everyone of the LTI and mobile discussion taking place on Thursday. So 2 days from now, if you're interested in joining us, you can find the details here on the IMS website. You do need to be an IMS member to attend this meeting. And I think you need to be logged in to be able to get access to the details here of this meeting. So our next roundtable meeting will take place on the 25th of February. We'll let you know what that agenda is shaping up to look like in advance of the meeting. But I just want to thank you for your attendance again today. If you'd like to see a recording of today's meeting or previous meetings, you can find them at that forum link that's there in the shared agenda document. So thanks, everyone. Appreciate all your questions and those who were so generous with their answers. And we'll talk to you all again next month. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.